Before beginning, I would just like to acknowledge that the following images were all filmed on traditional Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee territory. I am grateful to live and learn as an uninvited guest upon these traditional lands. In the beginning, our nascent planet was a roiling admixture of earth and fire. 4.5 billion years ago, this semi-molten mass of material cooled, and for the next 500 million years, Earth began to stabilize. Around 4 billion years ago, the first continents formed and provided a superficial structure to a planet otherwise in flux. Without this capacity of Earth to endure and persist, to occupy space in ways that are relative to the life forms that play upon, above, and underneath its surface unchanging, there would be no us capable of articulating the evolutionary history that it enables. Earth not only carries within it traces of its own past, but also co-constitutes the very sense of time in which it persists, a time in which we now emerge alongside, within, and as Earth. John Sallis's call for a return to thinking the elemental, such that the distinction between a supersensible beyond nature and nature in its sensuous presence is dismantled. For Sallis, this return to nature is imperative for the thinking to come, and is necessary to give fitting words to the advocacy of ecological restraint in a way that does not replicate the attitude that created the environmental crisis in the first place. In defining the elemental as the from which, not of composition, but of manifestation, Sallis here echoes Empedocles' original expression of elemental earth, air, fire, and water as animate governing principles that indicate not only a visible material aspect, but also a depth from which mythic and symbolic potencies can emerge. As that which conditions the very disclosure of meaning, the elemental cannot be defined through direct correlation or representation. Thinking with the elemental requires instead returning to the unconscious origins of experience and to thereby bring to sense that which commonly eludes it. The elemental is antecedent to the appearance of objects, a horizon that conditions their emergence. Though, as Sallis here reminds us, elementals are encompassing each in their own way, and as such we are invited to return to Empedocles' original injunction to ponder each thing in the way by which it is manifest. Earth possesses a unique capacity to endure across vast temporal spans, while also being sufficiently plastic to enable forms of inscription upon which we can read the traces of time, a process we can liken to a form of earthly memory. Inscription, also engraving or impressing, is after all, as memory theorist Anne Whitehead notes, perhaps the most ubiquitous metaphor for memory in Western culture. From Plato's descriptions of memory inscribing itself upon the wax tablet of the soul, Caruth's image of trauma indelibly engraved on the mind, Locke's blank slate, or Freud's mystic writing pad, remembering is intimately bound to figures of writing and inscription. Headstones, cave paintings, and the evidence of previous extinction events, though existing across vastly different temporal scales, are each nonetheless conveyed through time by the unique capacity of earth and of stone to endure. Indeed, our very sense of deep time is developed in accordance with the way we read these inscriptions in and on earth. As time's most tangible conveyor, earth and stone in particular conjures spans that transient humans cannot witness and yet are called upon anxiously to narrate. Beginning within the materiosemiotic regime of certain human cultures, we can consider those lithic monuments that often mark our passage from ashes to ashes and from dust to dust. Intended as a permanent point of focus for remembrance and mourning, headstones are typically constructed from granite, marble, limestone, slate, sandstone, or more simply, natural field stones. Their inscriptions, epitaphs, proverbs, odes, humors, warnings, symbols, testaments of faith, aphorisms, allegorical figures, and biographical details are thus conveyed to those that outlive the deceased and beyond, to subsequent generations who may or may not have a direct connection with the interred. Without the relative permanence of headstones, who would, for example, remember Sir Joseph Blackburn, who in 1709 departed this life remembered by a dear mother and the children, and was laid to rest at St. Luke's Anglican churchyard in Newfoundland, Canada? This inscription has been conveyed through time, sheltered by stone's ability to persist and weather the elemental effects of water in the form of precipitation, air as wind, and fire in the persistent glare of sun. Long after fleshy bodies have returned to earth along with those who knew of them, the headstone nonetheless remains as a sometimes ambiguous memory of those who have passed. There is thus a sense in which the memory of the interred becomes the stone itself. The content, the inscription in the stone, is the expression, the memory, and its varieties of semiotic content are conveyed through more than just human temporalities by this uniquely lithic affordance. As that which is capable of conveying such content through time in ways that outlive the relatively localized memory of their authors, the headstone transcends the merely human capacity for memory. The headstone thus manifests temporalities exceeding individual lives, and in some cases, even entire cultures. Expanding now to the temporal edge of human culture, somewhere between the cognitive revolution and the agricultural evolution, ancient artist-shamans began to inscribe images on stone walls. Most instances of this art form, if it can be called such, that survive today are found in caves where stone has enabled, preserved, and conveyed their images through the depths of time. In a true act of lithopoiesis, the images therein co-emerged through a double articulation of artist and stone. The warp and weft of the lithic canvas enacts a creative limitation whereby the curve of a predatory cat's spine can be accentuated. A group of wild horses can become animated by the shadows that play among them. The stone thus impassively receives these images even as it dynamically participates in their recreation. It holds what it has been entrusted with, protected from the ravages of time. About 40,000 years after the creation of the cave paintings at Chauvet, a near instant in geological terms, filmmaker Werner Herzog will name his film document of these phenomenon Cave of Forgotten Dreams, as if to indicate that the original meanings of these images have, like their authors, disappeared from manifest time. The subject of Herzog's title comes to life in the film. The shape of the cave and the images that play across the surface of its walls are animated by a dynamic, moving cinematography that frames stone as a living surface. Our encounters with these images, whether in film or in person, is a lure into the depths of cultural memory and can be a goad towards exploring the deepest parts of our subconscious selves. As beings with an innate desire for origin stories, stories of meaning, stories of cosmic participation, we intuit in those images nascent narratives concerning not only the particulars of their manifest content, but also the intentions of their authors. What latent affectivities emerged when proto-humans, encountering those surfaces in depth, first felt the need and desire to inscribe images of nature both without and within? What truths were manifest in those therianthropic images? What magic enacted? What worlds thereby created? And how, when 40,000 years later, modern humans discover these images and analyze, digitize, and carbon date them, does their meaning change? While we apply our state-of-the-art technologies and systems of thought to answering these questions, the images simply abide, held in their lithic embrace and conveyed through time by stone's unforgetting obstinance. Moving finally now beyond the realm of human and culture, both terms of course being interpreted broadly here, we will expand our vision to creatively accommodate an instance of more than human patternings that elemental earth conveys through time. In the case of both headstones and cave paintings, we have been primarily concerned with the ability of stone to convey through time, relatively unaffected, that which a human author has inscribed upon its surface. What of those instances, however, where there is no human author so involved? Can Earth remember itself? The Cretaceous-Paleogene extinction event, perhaps the most well-known of the Big Five, occurred approximately 66 million years ago due to what is now almost unanimously accepted as a massive asteroid impact. Evidence of this cataclysmic event is found not only in the 150-kilometer diameter crater in the region of what is now Mexico's Yucatan Peninsula, but also surrounding the planet in a geological layer that contains unusually high levels of iridium, a common element found in asteroids. The impact resulted in the sudden mass extinction of 3/4 of all plant and animal species on Earth, including all dinosaurs, and dramatically shifted the subsequent evolution of life on Earth. We today have the evidence of myriad extinct species of microbiota, fungus, plants, mammals, reptiles, fish, amphibians, birds, and of course dinosaurs, conveyed to us largely from imprints and fossilizations enabled by the unique properties of elemental Earth. If we are able for a moment to speculatively remove ourselves from the picture, would there yet remain a sense that the Earth itself remembers this traumatic event? If we limit memory to the ability of a sentient mind to recall information from the past in the form of a representation, then we must surely answer in the negative. It is not at all apparent that the Earth can perform such an act. If, however, we understand memory in processual terms as an embodied phenomenon that is continually reenacted and thereby remembered through the patterning of its ecological relations, there may be a sense in which we can creatively express the memory of more than human Earth. The extinction event, while surely not remembered by any currently existent being, has nonetheless been taken up and accommodated by subsequent ecological patterning that is enacted at least in part by, in, and through the perdurance of elemental Earth. The event has, in other words, left an imprint, having both physical properties, the impact crater, the geological boundary, and, following Bateson, mind-like properties, that is, the subsequent adaptation of ecological patterning and information exchange. This event thus exists, not only as a particular happening that occurred on a particular date in the past, but also as it continues to echo through earthly patterning as an ongoing remembering, a remembering that because of the temporal remoteness of the event can only enter human culture through its traces, imprints, and imaginings in the form of a perpetually creative lithopoiesis. Let us conclude now by creatively envisioning a world in which elemental Earth suddenly vanishes, leaving behind only air, fire, and vaporous water, lacking any solidity or persistence of form. Without superficial reference, how is space here constituted? Without any semblance of persistent form, how would the past be preserved? Indeed, could the past as such exist? How might we think future in this highly entropic world? Lacking the relative stability of earthly patterning, we must assume that this world's etheric inhabitants could not plan, project, or build in the same way we do here on Earth. Indeed, a doppelganger Heraclitus, presumably fiery, would not even be afforded the opportunity to step into the same river once without Earth to support and hold its flow. Possibilities here would be made and unmade at such speeds that history and future as we Terrans know it would not exist. Indeed, the concept of time in scientifically informed Western culture has developed largely in accordance with the relative stability and persistence of Earth, a discovery commonly held to have its beginnings in the work of theologian Thomas Burnet and further developing through the work of Scottish geologists Hutton and Lyell. It was in particular Hutton's turn in the 18th century away from biblical dogma towards reading the rocks themselves that enabled a conceptualization of deep time that far exceeded the previously accepted explanation of a 6,000-year-old Earth. As we continue today to make and unmake temporalities in and through earthly relations, it is becoming increasingly necessary to consider the ways in which the planet may remember our legacy. What future worldings will the archaeosphere, the layer of humanly modified Earth that will remain for eons, enact? What habitats will the moon-like surfaces of strip mines and the craters left behind after mountaintop removal give rise to? What modes of life will they constrain? And what of the millions of tons of topsoil now being exhausted by unsustainable farming practices and washed out to sea? Just as in the tumultuous earth-forming time of the Hadean, ours is an era of apocalypse in which worlds are being made and unmade in accordance with our actions or lack thereof. The return to elemental earth and the lithic temporalities it enables provides valuable means to reconsider our role as co-creative participants in all earthly relations, imperative for thinking the world to come.